So as you probably heard, we are now recording. So welcome everyone to our weekly call. I will just briefly swap to my slide for a moment, just to remind you the structure for the call today. Okay, so firstly, thank you to the long-term sponsors of the call, DNS OARC, whose support, as always, is very much appreciated. The plan for today, slightly different structure to some of our calls. I'm going to introduce our speakers momentarily, or hand over to them. So we're looking at the case, as it says on the slide, for and against blockchain-based naming systems. I'll hand over in a second to Josh and Ross, both from Infoblox, who will, I'm going to paraphrase shamelessly, and they will probably say it much differently to this, but in shorthand, tell us why this is blockchain-based naming systems are a problem looking for a solution, maybe, something along those lines. Whereas conversely, Alex Urbelis, General Counsel and CISO of the Ethereum Name Service, is going to tell us why actually they're a really good idea, possibly complementary to the DNS. We'll hear in a bit. If I didn't say solution looking for a problem, that's what I meant. Sorry, just looking at the chat, Vicky. And then finally, Michael will come in and sort of just look at this from a slightly different perspective, picking up on the implications of blockchain-based naming systems from the perspective of ICANN contract holders. So I think the registries in particular, I'm guessing, Michael, and what might need to change in the contracts, what the implications are, were they to become an extended part of the internet naming system. We'll definitely have time after that for comments and questions. So we'll use the virtual hand on Zoom to get in the queue. I'll also look to the chat because I know sometimes people are in environments where you can't easily talk on the microphone. If we stick to time, we have about 15 minutes for that. And then if there's time at the end, I'll just run through some of the headlines from the last week or so. If there isn't, you're already on the mailing list, or if not, I'll share the slides anyway after the call. So we'll play that bit by ear, because I think the value is going to be much more so in the discussion than the other stuff. So that's the plan. Without further ado, let me hand over first then to Ross and Josh. And you could use the time as you see fit to tell us why, if I get the words properly this time, this is a solution looking for a problem.
Okay. Well, I guess since I wrote the original piece that sparked with that very title, so I'll start. So my name is Josh. I am an education specialist at Infoblox. So and Ross and I, we both obviously really DNS is critical to our day-to-day job. So we try to expand our knowledge in this area. And when I came across blockchain DNS, the concept really, I think I saw it first about 10 years ago at one of the OARC meetings. And I thought, that's interesting. I find it fascinating from a technical perspective. But then I really struggled to see how, as an end user, this would enhance my experience. Because I think some of it may come down to a bit philosophical, that I think having an organization, however you may think it's less than perfect, but have a central authority to go to and say, hey, somebody has this name that belongs to me. There's some way to resolve that. And also, I think some of the issues I see is more practical, like such as by design. If you have a name on the blockchain, you cannot take it offline. Now, that may be seen as a good feature, but also if I'm a bad person, I set up a domain that's hosting bad stuff, it cannot be taken offline. So I see that as a negative to a larger impact to the end users. And then there's technical, I think scalability, performance, but I'll leave that for Ross. And so Ross, I'll let you get a
Well,
word
yeah,
in.
yeah. So I definitely agree with Josh's view of that there is a positive to having things like the UDRP process, right? From a trademark holder's perspective, right? Some way to protect themselves. There's also the downside from a trademark holder's perspective of the proliferation of naming as a whole, right? Which goes into the whole GTLD thing, defensive naming and all those kind of things. And then do we add a whole nother naming system where that has to expand and continue to grow without end, it seems, for those holding that area. I think, as Josh pointed out, I don't know that they're necessarily concerns, but questions around the scalability and how that works with replicating, the entire blockchain between nodes and how that would work. So I think Josh and I are mostly not necessarily so much against it as we are curious about why. What's the upside? What does this add? How does the typical day-to-day user even integrate this into their workflow, and how would they directly benefit from it? Those are kind of the areas I think that we have want to learn more about it.
Okay. And anything else that either of you wanted to add? I'm going to cut you off. You have time if there are any additional comments.
No, I think the main thing is like Josh and I said, we really want to learn more about why, and I think there's, as you put it, there's the solution looking for a problem, right? What problem are we trying to solve? I think that's kind of one of the big questions we have beyond the whole governance and immutability piece, which we definitely understand there are certain places in the world that is critical. But there's the trade-off there, right? So, you can take bad actors and take that immutability and use it for ill will, if you will, rather than just trying to deal with places where you're trying to fight against, undue censorship or things like that, where you have regimes that are trying to limit communication. It's probably a nice way to put it.
That's kindly put, Ross.
Yeah. So I guess I'll lay out mine. So maybe then Alex, I see that you're probably taking notes. So
Yeah.
So I'll lay out some of my other observations, and it could be due to my lack of understanding how the system is designed to work. So part of it too is my understanding is if I want to resolve names on the blockchain of, say, unstoppable domains, I need to run a node, and this node could be full or partial, and that comes with it. Seems like a pretty heavy tax on the storage demand. Could be several hundred gigabytes if I want to run a full node, and I can use a API gateway. But then we're back to the whole, well, whoever runs the gateway controls what I can resolve. So that's sort of, in my view, we're right back to the same spot with, hey, an ISP run DNS server can filter my DNS domains or whatever I can resolve. So can an API gateway. So that's kind of where I see philosophically, I'm not sure what I can gain from it. It seems like the only way I can get the full benefit is run my full node, but that's hard to do on, say, a mobile device. And so I can see of a way of this could be a useful feature per domain. Let's say for my domain, say infoblox.com, I want to publish the ledger to the world to see, so you can see how I've changed each name throughout time. I could see that being a useful feature, but I'm struggling to see how that could scale or how that would benefit the entire internet namespace.
Well, I'll address that when I go through it. I have sort of a set of points that I want to make based on the 10 minutes allotted. But I think in short, the answer to that is that all blockchain naming systems are not created equally, and that's something I'll go into in greater detail. There's a massive difference between the way that Unstoppable has acted and the way that ENS has acted. And I'll draw some attention to those differences as well. So, and I think you bring up very valid and somewhat intractable points there too, Josh, with the manner in which UD has presented itself and the way it's comported itself with respect to the DNS.
Okay, well, are you happy then will that segue neatly then, Alex, into if I put your slides up, and then that gives a little bit more discussion time possibly at the back
Yeah,
end to.
that'd be great. I don't have to talk as quickly. I appreciate that, Josh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's always a plus, isn't it? Okay.
yeah, it is good to see you both since Sweden. So, yeah. Um, yeah, and if you don't mind, Andrew, if you mind throwing those up for me, they're
Yeah,
just really placeholders for various things here. So,
yeah, they should be on the screen now, pretty much, I hope.
okay, all right, very good. Yeah, and I do want to echo Ross's comment here. It is probably fairly unique to have three lawyers on this call. So, maybe we should buy a lotto ticket or something today. So, so with that, if you want to step through, I'm going to make the case here. And good afternoon, by the way, everybody from the Chelsea Arts Club. Over the next 10 minutes, I really want to make a straightforward case that blockchain-based naming systems like ENS in particular are not a threat to DNS. They are, in fact, a natural extension into a new technological error here. And I'm going to walk you through four core ideas. First, I want to show you that we're solving the same fundamental problems that DNS solved 30 years ago, just for a different layer of the internet. Second, I want to try to explain why ENS was designed from day one to complement DNS, not necessarily to compete with it at all, and how your existing domains can actually participate in the ENS ecosystem for free. And then third, I want to explain why not all blockchain naming systems are created equally. That was the foreshadowing that I had made with respect to Josh's comment here, and why ENS's constitutional commitments make it a trustworthy partner for the DNS community. So fourth, I want to also try to address some of your concerns and some of the other concerns that I had anticipated about blockchain naming systems head on. So by the end, I hope that some of you will be moved in some respects and that see this and begin to see this as an either or conversation, and or rather not as an either or conversation, but as a both and opportunity. So starting with, if you can move on to the slides there, we want to address now the historical parallels here. And just as the DNS was introduced to replace IP addresses with human readable names, so too was ENS created to replace wallet addresses and decentralized content identifiers with human readable names. Same exact concept here. So here's what we within ENS Labs think about very deeply. How do we make sure ENS adds to the DNS? Because we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I mean, DNS made IP addresses disappear for the average user. ENS makes wallet addresses disappear for the average user. Both systems exist to make technology usable by real people. So if we want to skip over to the next slide there, Andrew, that would be great. And because this brings me to my second point that and I really want to be unambiguous about this, that ENS complements the DNS. The Ethereum Name Service complements the DNS. It doesn't replace it. And let me explain what I mean, right? We already know this. DNS resolves names to IP addresses. Well, ENS resolves names to wallet addresses, to content hashes, to smart contracts. DNS serves web infrastructure. ENS serves blockchain infrastructure. These are different resolution targets for different technological contexts. There is no inherent conflict here. But when we were designing this, we went further than avoiding conflict. We built integration directly into the ENS protocol. So today, any DNS domain owner can use their existing domain to resolve cryptocurrency addresses, and you can do this for free. If you own example.com and you've implemented DNSSEC properly, you can link that domain to an Ethereum wallet address through ENS without paying us a dime, without paying us anything at all, without changing registrars, without disrupting your existing DNS configuration, your NS records, your MX records. Your traditional domain gains new functionality. That's what we're talking about in terms of complementary systems here. And this leads me then to the next section and this is directly on point for the issue that Josh had addressed, which is that not all blockchain naming systems are created equal. I'm not making the case for all blockchain naming systems overall. The approach matters, the values matter, and the commitment to coexistence, that really matters. And ENS at the outset made a really deliberate architectural and governance decision from the beginning here that we would operate exclusively in the .eth namespace, the .eth namespace, because that's a TLD that could actually never be delegated on the basis of the ISO 3166 Alpha 3 designations that are reserved names. This wasn't an accident or a temporary limitation. It's actually enshrined in the ENS Constitution within Article 3 that explicitly prohibits ENS from operating any other top-level domain other than .eth without ICANN's approval. So that's a binding constraint on our organization, a constitutional commitment that respects the domain name system ecosystem. And other blockchain naming providers, well, they've taken a very, very different path, and some may even believe they've taken like a sell first and worry about the consequences later mentality. That's not the best way to win friends and influence people in the DNS community. And we knew that from the outset, okay? Some have aggressively created dozens of alternative TLDs. You've got .crypto, .nft, .wallet, a whole bunch of others. These extensions, and I share your concerns, they directly conflict with potential ICANN TLDs. They directly conflict with the new GTLD program. They make some of these strings for which people are going to apply compromised assets from the outset. That's really problematic. And there's genuine namespace collision risks. These are big problems. So those actors have positioned blockchain naming as a competitor to DNS, not necessarily as a complementary service. This is not our approach within ENS. ENS was founded on the principle that we should work with the DNS, not against it. If you think about it, our DNSSEC integration, our single namespace model, our constitutional constraints, this is not marketing. They're structural commitments that make us a responsible participant in the global naming system. So this is what I ask all of you. When you evaluate blockchain naming systems, ask a simple question here. Is this system designed to coexist with DNS, or is it to compete with it? And I think if you look at ENS, you have to come to the conclusion that we were designed and constitutionally bound to coexist here. But and here's the differentiator here with respect to the technologies. And this is really critical because DNS alone, I think it's great. I love it. I'm a real DNS buffin. But DNS alone cannot provide the native properties that blockchain applications require. So let me explain here. And if we want to go to 3, Andrew, this is where we get to some of the meat and potatoes here about the differentiators. So this brings me to my third and I think final point, which is that there are certain properties that blockchain naming systems provide that DNS was actually never designed to deliver. And the first one of those is cryptographic ownership. So within ENS, a name is an asset that's held directly in a wallet. It's not an entry in a registry database in a zone file that's contained by a third party. It's something to which you hold the keys, you own the name, full stop. And I can understand why some people find that problematic, but this is a unique space. Secondly, there's this possibility of having trustless transfers. If you want to sell or gift an ENS name, you don't need an intermediary. The transfer happens on chain. It happens peer-to-peer with cryptographic certainty. There's no third parties that are in the mix here. And then third is censorship resistance. And this is becoming increasingly more important. So with ENS, there's no single registry operator, no registrar, no platform or government can unilaterally decide that your name, that your domain should stop working. For many users around the world, this property is quickly becoming not a luxury, it's becoming a necessity. And also, as we see the progress of technology and agentic AI coming forward really, really quickly. So we're beginning to see that identities, not just websites, are becoming the primary way that we're going to be navigating online. So as digital identity grows into a first-class role of the DNS, this aspect of blockchain naming systems is going to have increasing importance. And then fourth and actually penultimately, I was about to say finally, but penultimately here, there's smart contract integration here. ENS names can interact programmatically with decentralized finance protocols, with decentralized apps, with NFT marketplaces, with DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. They're not just pointers to addresses. They're programmable identity primitives. There's a lot on which you can build here. And then fifth and finally, the resolution infrastructure itself for blockchain names does not depend on any centralized servers. It runs on Ethereum. So decentralized resolution of content matters most in moments like the Iranian internet blackout, when people need resilient ways to push critical information out during a crisis. So, but look, I have to acknowledge, DNS was designed absolutely brilliantly for the client-server web. ENS is designed for the peer-to-peer web, a web where users custody their own assets, where transactions happen without intermediaries, and where censorship resistance actually matters in a very critical way. So these are different design constraints that demand a different tech, and they complement each other in this sense. They don't necessarily compete. So I want to address some of the concerns here on the case against blockchain naming that often come up. And we hear things, four things, generally: namespace fragmentation. And I think there's, if you switch slides, Andrew, I think there's just one more here. So we hear about namespace fragmentation, regulatory uncertainty, and user confusion, right? Well, as we established, ENS operates exclusively in .eth, right? Our Constitution prohibits us from creating other TLDs unless we go and get sanctioned by ICANN to do that. And unlike other blockchain naming systems, we made this binding commitment not to compete with ICANN namespaces, right? This is integration by design in our view. And then this regulatory uncertainty. Well, this is quite interesting because ENS is governed by a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organizations. All of those processes are entirely transparent, including the dispute resolution mechanisms. It's not the Wild West of other blockchain naming systems. It's a different governance model, decentralized rather than centralized. But interestingly enough, it's a governance model that actually has many analogs with the ICANN multi-stakeholder model. And then there's this issue of user confusion. Well, users already navigate multiple namespaces every day, and ICANN is going to be making many, many more namespaces available over the next coming years. And we've got email addresses, we have social media handles, domain names. The context here determines which system resolves which identifier. I'm just about out here, so if you can keep going, Andrew. So adding wallet names to my mind is not going to add that much more fundamental complexity here. On the implications, though, for ICANN contract holders, I'd frame this as an opportunity, not a threat. And you think about it, registrars can offer ENS alongside traditional domains. It could be a new revenue stream. DNSSEC-enabled domains already qualify for ENS integration. Now, the market for identity and naming is expanding, not necessarily contracting. That's the big one here. So there's a strategic question for contract holders, and it's not whether blockchain naming threatens ICANN's model here. It's whether contract holders are going to participate in its growth, not simply pretend it doesn't exist. So I want to close with this principle here. The best tech here, disappears when it's working well. You don't notice it. You don't think about DNS every time you type a URL. You just type a name and the website appears. The complexity is invisible. DNS made IP addresses disappear for the average person. That was the revolution that made the internet accessible to billions of people. And ENS, this blockchain naming system, exists to make wallet addresses disappear for that same average person. These systems don't compete with each other. They're partners in the same mission, making complex technology simple enough that everybody can use it. And we designed DNS to extend this accessibility revolution that DNS started, not to undermine it. Our philosophy is DNS first integration, blockchain native only where necessary. And we put that philosophy into our Constitution. It's a binding commitment that we will always prioritize coexistence over conquest. We've been and are and will continue to work with the DNS community, not against it. I think that the internet succeeded because DNS translated machine complexity into human simplicity. Blockchain will succeed when naming does the same for wallet complexity. So together, DNS and ENS can make the entire internet, whether it's traditional or decentralized, simply work. And that's what we're about. We're just about making things all work together. So thank you guys for giving me a little bit more time and for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. I think that's starting to prompt some questions which people are sharing in the chat, but we'll give them a bit more time for that. But that, in the meantime, is a fantastic segue since you talked about the coexistence, etc. So that segues, in my opinion, anyway, very, very nicely into Michael's slot, if you will, in terms of if this becomes a thing, then Michael. So, what does it all mean for the ICANN contract holders? Take it from there, and I'll assume you probably want me to put your slides on the screen, and you're on mute, just so you know.
There we go. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, if you could just load my slides, that would be great.
Yeah, it should be on the screen now or any second.
Momentarily. So, as Andrew said, to me, I believe that this is not an either or. Next slide, please. I think we have a false dichotomy here. A lot of the discussions that I've heard over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, you're either for or against. And I think the lawyer in me says it's not an either or, but it's a depend. Next slide, please. So what I want to do is I do want to talk on what I would say some of the glass half full arguments are that would complement some of the things that Alex had said before. The existing DNS marketplace has largely plateaued. We've been at around 360, 370 million names. There really has not been that much change. The hockey growth within the DNS marketplace in the early 2000s is long gone. The other thing that I think is really interesting is looking to the next generation of internet users. I've worked with Alex and the folks at DNS. I attended the Solana Breakpoint conference in Abu Dhabi in December, and it is interesting to see the next generation of internet users. I think most of the people on this call are probably closer to retirement than closer to graduation from university. So to me, what I'm looking for is where is the next Vint Cerf, Steve Crocker, Paul Makapetris that is going to challenge the status quo and think outside the box. I have been a little disappointed. Part of the argument for expanding the DNS space back in 2012 was look at all the great innovation. Sadly, I think the innovation has fallen short. There has been some positive developments, but overall, I find it depressing that one of the great services being offered now is how to block a domain name, not how to pay to block a domain name from being registered. That to me is not a positive thing. I also, to Alex's point, I think there are untapped ecosystems. The thing I always tell people in the DNS space is instead of focusing on the pie of 370 million names, focus on the 8 billion people, the 20 billion IoT devices, the countless tens of billions of bots, and that are going to come and be part of the next AI generation. How can we focus on opening up those distribution channels to leverage the phenomenal infrastructure that has been built and powered the internet over the last several decades? Next slide, please. To Ross and Josh's point, there is a valid glass half empty argument. One of the concerns that I have had, sort of as a trademark attorney, is the choice of the Web3 community to call these things domain names. There is a lot, I think this has led in part to some of the consumer confusion. Part of the DNS is the uniqueness. This goes to IPC3 of a single authoritative root. When you have different top-level domains operating on different blockchains, that leads to confusion and potentially harm, and that is problematic. I think Alex also talked about the issue about some registry operators potentially engaging in front running, not waiting for ICANN to launch this next round of new GTLDs, but launching their initiatives now and somehow thinking that may give them a priority or a leg up. That to me, again, is problematic, and it's sort of a black mark on the overall Web3 community. The other concern I have, again, as an intellectual property attorney, is the current patent arms race that is going on. There are a number of Web3 operators that are filing a proliferation of patents. This concerns me because I believe, and I'll get to this later on, I believe that the path forward involves following through on the principles that were recently articulated in SAC 132 about free and open software. I think that a high tide raises all the ships in a harbor, and we should be focusing on non-proprietary solutions that could be work across the entire ecosystem. Regarding anonymity, this is I understand that this is something that is very core to the Web3 community, but what I have tried to articulate with this community is, if you do want to integrate with the Web2 space, namespace, if you look at NIS2 and the proliferation of other laws that are being passed by governments, anonymity will not cut it. If you have pure anonymity, there is no accountability. And that is, I think, a fundamental blocker, particularly when it gets into rights protections and others. The final problem that I want to talk about is about immutability. At the Breakpoint conference in, what is it, in Abu Dhabi, there was a presentation by Internex and D3 where they were talking about tokenizing domain names. And one of the problems that I have here is that only the registry could be the authoritative source of information for a domain name. And this is fact. You can look at a number of legal decisions in which the registry is the authoritative source of information. So having these conflicting authoritative sources, I think, is problematic if the integration is not done properly. Next slide, please. So ICANN actually has somewhat of a history with alternate namespace. If you go back to the original proof of concept round in 2000, this was with Chris Ambler and .web, there were issues regarding conflicts between what ICANN was putting in the authoritative A root and what are deemed private alternate namespaces. There have been a number of cases. You can go to the ICANN litigation page and you can read this. And in all of those decisions, ICANN has prevailed as not being prevented from adding these spaces. So I think that is an important legal distinction. One of the earliest blockchain discussions within the ICANN community that I noted was at ICANN 60 in Abu Dhabi. I actually participated on this panel with former ICANN board member Pindar Wang and a representative of the Ethereum Foundation. So this was the first introduction, I would say, publicly within the ICANN space. And as a result of that panel discussion, the first Web2, Web3 integration took place in mid-2018 when the .lux TLD announced a deployment with the Ethereum Name Service. In 2024, GoDaddy, the dominant largest registrar, did a control panel ENS integration. The one thing where I think ICANN has dropped the ball, and I raised this publicly during the public forum at the recent Dublin meeting, is ICANN has failed to require any RCEP by registries that have deployed this integration. The RCEP stands for Registry Service Evaluation Process. This was a consensus policy that was created within the ICANN community as a result of the VeriSign wildcard service. And the idea of RCEP is to provide technical and legal certainty to registry operators. I think that ICANN's failure to require any of these registry operators to date to go through that RCEP has led to this void that has been rather problematic. Next slide. And I believe it's my last slide as well. So the path forward. Um, I believe that the path forward is one involving community engagement. I've worked with a number of folks within the Web3 community. The longest, obviously, the work over the last 7 to 8 years with ENS and the Ethereum Foundation. I've also recently had the opportunity to meet with some of the folks from SNS from the Solana community, as well as Unstoppable and some others within the Web3 space. So I think they actually not only need to work among themselves, but also some of the work that is being done in ICANN SAC. Rick Wilhelm is leading a group within SAC that is specifically looking at this, and there's also some work being done at the IETF. So the path forward, and something that I've basically committed to over the last couple of weeks, sort of my New Year's resolution, so to speak, is to actually move forward and to file a formal RCEP with ICANN. So that ICANN will actually have to be confronted with the underlying technology, both from a legal as well as from a technical standpoint. And to this regard, the one of the registries that has stepped up and indicated their willingness to engage in this endeavor is Nova Registry. They operate the .link TLD. So this is something that I look forward with working with Nova and the broader internet community to provide some predictability. So that is it, and I will turn it back to you, Alex, Andrew, so we can go to an open Q&A.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Let me just switch off the sharing for a second. Two interesting comments in the chat, which I will draw to your collective attention. They're both compliments. So Tom says, "This is disappointing. I came here looking to watch a fight." I think this is a compliment from Vicky. That was the least crazy presentation on blockchain naming I have ever heard.
I love it. Thank you, Vicky. Yeah.
So there you are, Alex. I think that's better than being damned by faint praise, being the least crazy presentation.
The least crazy, yeah. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, I'm usually not the least crazy anything. So there's a first for everything.
So okay, seriously, let's invite comments from each of our sort of panelists to each other, but also from the floor. If you want to sort of raise a point, if you could use your virtual hand if possible, that would be fantastic. Or pop something in the chat if not. And I'll maybe throw something in and then see what other comments people have, which has come up in a couple of the comments in different ways. Depending on your perspective, there's the sort of censorship resistance, or I can't think of the other half of that, but there's the I put up illegal content that you can't take away, which some of you will know, or many of you will know, for transparency, as I'm a trustee of the Internet Watch Foundation, I would not want it to be easy to put up and not remove CSAM, which I think hopefully we can all agree is a bad idea to have that. So since there are several different comments along those lines, that Alex, perhaps if I throw that one to you as a count, how do we deal with the bad content or the bad owner of publisher of content?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to address that. It's a difficult issue. I appreciate John Christoph bringing it up in the comments as well, and it is, to a certain extent, a matter of perspective, but it's also a reality that people are doing bad things with data, CSAM in particular. And I think there's a couple of ways in which you can address that on the blockchain, but fundamentally, I don't want to necessarily equate, and I don't think it's right to equate censorship resistance with a free-for-all or a lack of accountability. Within ENS, we try to think of ourselves as like a public utility here. We are a base naming protocol, and we want to try to keep that as neutral and as hard to co-opt as possible. That's what the decentralization ethos is about, precisely because concentrated control over things that have been core infrastructure have historically been abused. And at the same time, we fully accept, however, that there should be human operators at the edges, at gateways, resolvers, APIs, apps, and there's certain legal and ethical obligations around what is CSAM content and obviously other illegal content. And that's where reviewing and logging and abuse handling and due process belong. They belong in these places, but they should be decided along the similar governance mechanisms that would govern the protocols themselves, right? So I think in a decentralized way or through a DAO, we can come to some kind of consensus by which we would deal with these types of things in a reasonable manner. So in other words, I guess the way to look at this is that we're designed to minimize unaccountable power over naming at the protocol level while leaving space for accountable interventions by operators, by communities that are farther up the stack. But that's a design principle. And I think, speaking for the InfoSec community, as also being part of the InfoSec community, the hacker community, having been the CISO of the NFL as well, the InfoSec community has really, pushed controls to the edges, right? Like they're about, using controls sparingly, having transparency, auditability, clear governance, right? We don't want to turn critical shared infrastructure into a centralized kill switch for the internet. That would just be bad all around. So that's how I would respond.
So, which I guess is analogous to ICANN with its DNS abuse activity. There's a sort of a higher level sort of governance process for that stuff, and above the actual base protocol.
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of that can mirror the ICANN processes, for sure. And in fact, if there is going to be, as Michael suggested, and as we have been actively promoting, integration between the DNS and ENS, Web 3 and Web 2 integration, especially through the new GTLD program that's forthcoming and existing TLDs, those ICANN processes are going to apply to all of those DNS-based domain names already, right? And then it's a matter of, and I think this is what Josh and Ross were bringing up earlier, well, then you do need to have some kind of standardized process whereby if you have a name that's on chain, it has to match the domain name lifecycle that ICANN has. And I think that's absolutely critical.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me at that point bring in Josh, who has his virtual hand raised, and then I'll have a look at some of the chat comments after.
Right.
Josh.
Okay, so obviously I have a lot of, I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll just say the probably top of my mind is still, how do I explain this benefit to the regular end users who may not care about the wallet, right? I still have a hard time articulating that to them. So it's mostly for me. So let me kind of thinking out loud. I own the domain infoblox.com. I signed it with the NSSEC, and I set up the integration with ENS. What does that mean for my customers? So maybe you can expand more on that. What benefit does it bring for me as a domain owner and for the end users in that case?
Yeah, sure. So that you could have full-on ENS integration there. You could use your domain name as a wallet address as well. You could go to joshquell.com and people could send you currency or whatever on the blockchain over to you, as long as it's configured correctly. So that adds, and that's this issue of added functionality that registrars can incorporate already, and some of them have. And if you look at ENS, we have this gasless DNSSEC integration with GoDaddy already. That was a big announcement we made maybe about a year and a half or 2 years ago. But also I think too, Josh, that we're thinking about this in the context of traditional domains that are used for entities, companies, organizations. Where I see there being real innovation here is to look at domains as digital identifiers. And if you think about, in an ETH or a Bitcoin, right? We consider these things digital assets. Well, domains were really some of the first digital assets I think that people ever really created. And they still have this massive inherent value. But if domains are going to be used as digital identifiers for people to have this consistent identity that allows them to traverse the Web 2 and the Web 3 space consistently and permanently, that's great for the DNS community because it solves one of the biggest problems for registrars and registries, which is drop-off and renewals. So if I use alexanderurbelis.com as my identifier, my sign-in system, I sign in with Ethereum. I don't sign in with Google or Facebook anymore. I sign in with my name that I own. My terms of service apply, not necessarily the terms of service of Facebook or Google. I can't have this name rugged. I'm going to continually renew that domain forever, as long as I possibly can. And that brings more revenue, I think, to all of the parties here if we start to think about domain names in the DNS as a way for digital identifiers to exist, not necessarily just domains. And one final point about that is you look at Facebook, right? Billions of usernames compared to the DNS with what, 360 million domains, including all of the new GTLDs, everything, most of everything, the majority of which exist in the .com zone file. If you look at that, there is massive room for growth if we start using the DNS for identifiers.
Okay, thank you.
Well, actually, looking at that room for growth point, Alex, and unsurprisingly, I suspect most of the questions are kind of directed towards you because obviously this is the newer thing compared to the DNS. So, a sort of technical question from Carlos about Ethereum at 13 transactions per second and layer 2. Yeah, okay, and I know there are some enhancements going through which will sort of speed up. Is there a capacity limit, I think is the question. If it does become the root of trust, the key identifier, can the system handle it? And we'll maybe then go into some of the implications for the, if you like, the DNS ecosystem on the back of that. But what's your perspective first on can the ENS sort of take the strain?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, capacity is front of mind for everybody here. And I think if you look at the enhancements to the Ethereum layer 1, right, not even talking about layer 2, the layer 1 enhancements here in terms of capacity have been tremendous. I mean, the gas prices for transactions have gone way, way, way down. And I think there is going to be ever increasing capacity at the L1 level as well. And so I think, you should actually watch out in this space for announcements along those lines, I would say over the next few weeks as well. So I think, I think it can handle it. And to the extent that it couldn't, a lot of those transactions, let's say there's massive amount of transactions that nobody anticipated because everybody in the world starts using domains as digital identifiers. Well, that would be great, number one, but we could always offload some of that to L2 systems. There's plenty of those in the works. And that's something that we've been discussing as well for quite some time and have had on the burner. So, but this issue of L1 capacity or layer 1 capacity at Ethereum is actually expanding tremendously, and I'm extraordinarily optimistic about it.
Brilliant. Okay. And then for balance, I'll throw this at any of the other three speakers to give you a chance to pause for breath, and then I'll bring Tom in. The other half of that, so the other side of that coin is a couple of questions. So, for example, Vicky has commented that RPZ is already having some scaling challenges. I'd hate to see this generate a massive new requirement for more filtering. So does anyone else have any concerns for, if you like, the sort of the DNS ecosystem? Would it fall over, do you think? Are we at risk of problems there that you're aware of? Does anyone have you might not have an opinion on that, and if
I don't really have I don't understand this very well. I'll say that right up front. This is a little over my head, but there is a problem today in the DNS. I think that a lot of people who are providing some essential infrastructure, particularly access providers, have a lot of expense, and there's no revenue associated with that. So I'm just sort of thinking if there is a potential opportunity here. Unfortunately, as soon as I thought that, the first thing I thought is content providers will want to start charging for names to the access provider. So unfortunately, the main thing I can see would be, in my opinion, quite a negative for the ecosystem. But I don't know. There is, in my opinion, a problem that there's a real mismatch of the expenses and the benefits. So I'm very scared about injecting, money. I mean, money is already there, but I mean, I'm scared about crossing these streams here. But Yeah, it seems like there's a possibility of that.
Did you get any reassurance, Vicky, from Alex's comments about the potential for sort of recurring revenues from the sort of the digital identifier element, which potentially would be a revenue upside for the ecosystem as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that the access providers who really are squeezed these days, no offense to any access providers on the call, but they also don't have the revenues to really innovate in service creation. They don't, most of them that I am familiar with don't really have the resources even to steal your identity and monetize that. So, yeah, I'm not sure that the people who would benefit from this are the ones that are struggling.
Okay. All right. Michael, did you have a response to any of that? And then I'll bring Tom in, and then we'll probably have to wrap up because I'm looking at the time.
Yep. Just to respond to Vicky, I get it. So as I always joke around with folks, my first domain name dispute that I handled was back in 1994, back when they were still free. If I could go back in time and realize the value of these assets, I would have been registering a lot more domain names. It amazes me, and that is, if you will, the beauty of capitalism. There's value, people find it. And that, to me, I think, is where I tend to be a little more optimistic. To your point, I don't look at the existing 360 million. I am looking at the other tens of billions of other identifiers that need resolution, how that can use one of the most ubiquitous hardened systems in the world and perhaps compensate those people, right? So to me, this is about how people that have expertise in the DNS can find new ways of potentially monetizing that. I don't have the answer to you. I'm going to be honest. Maybe I could hop back in a time machine in 10 or 15 years and give you that answer. But that, to me, is one of the reasons why I view that. That's part of my glass half full argument. Is I look back at things that I could not even have thought about 30 years ago and just totally got it wrong. So,
yeah. Thank you, Michael. Tom, apologies for keeping you waiting. Did you want to come in with something?
That's quite all right. I would just maybe we need to have this discussion again with someone that slightly crazier than Alex, perhaps, because he came in here and seemed to be quite a reasonable human being, where we were, of course, expecting a monster. But I think part of that may be, and I don't know, to echo Vicky, my understanding of this is probably more limited than it ought to be as well. But that, what Alex is suggesting is a way for a new system to be a pointer to the new things of Web3 wallets and all sorts of things that I don't have because I can't be bothered with them. And it touches DNS, but it's not one of these. Can we replace the current job of DNS with like blockchain-based stuff? Which I think we'd still all enjoy that discussion as well. So we would have somebody to chase out of the room with pitchforks and flaming brands. So maybe there's two discussions to be had here. One about naming wallets and one about naming websites.
Yeah, look, I appreciate that very much, that compliment, Tom. And I am a reasonable person sometimes, but it goes fundamentally back to the point that Josh and Ross had brought up too, that not all blockchain naming systems are created equally. There are some, to my mind, my belief, bad actors out there. And those are the ones with which anybody in DNS infrastructure community should be wary of. I don't think we're one of those. So back to you, Andrew.
Well, that seems to be a positive sort of comment to nearly end on. I was amused in the chat. I mean, you're on a sort of engineering-y dominated call, despite having three lawyers, when somebody helpfully points out that the glass is always full. But just sometimes it's half full with fluid and half full with gas. So not that we're pedants or anything, but there you are. Seriously, I think the sort of takeout for me from this is probably, I'll direct this towards the DNS community, as become clear. There's probably an educational task here, because I saw a few comments that there's maybe some details here that perhaps not everyone's on top of. So to have a properly informed discussion, and maybe to realise, as Alex has, I think, really been hinting very clearly, there's actually a tremendous opportunity for collaboration here. There's probably needs to have better understanding first, to build up collaboration. And I guess with the new TLD round happening and demand for agentic AI identifiers, IoT identifiers, etc., now feels like the right time to really push forward for that. So we need to build more bridges between the two communities. But in the interest of time, I won't do the other things I said I might do on the call, because we've used the time more profitably, which is fantastic. So if I say thank you to all of our panelists for your contributions and for stimulating some thoughts. This feels like we might need to revisit this topic several times to properly get our heads around it, but this was a tremendously positive first step in that. So thank you, everyone, and particularly though, Alex, for venturing in, potentially being outnumbered, and proving that you're not a crazy human being, I think was roughly the gist of the comment.
No, I appreciate everybody listening, hearing me out, and really paying close attention to the content here. It's nice to know that the things that I've said have been heard. So thank you so much, Andrew, and everybody on the call, for your comments, for being and for questioning me as well.
Brilliant. All right. Well, as I say, this is a conversation we'll hopefully continue. But in the meantime, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Have a fantastic week. And this time next week, we're ironically going to be talking about government-mandated censorship using the DNS. So that was obviously carefully planned in advance to build from this conversation.
Maybe I'll join that one too. That'd be great.
You'll be very welcome, Alex, of course.
Fantastic.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.